The sun was barely kissing the horizon when Sarah Chen stepped out of the dusty Jeep at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Her compact .22 caliber rifle slung across her shoulder like a walking stick. The morning air in the Afghan mountains carried the scent of dust and diesel fuel, mixing with the distant aroma of military-grade coffee that had been brewing since 0400 hours. As she adjusted her pack and surveyed the sprawling military compound, Sarah couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from the seasoned rangers who were already moving through their morning routines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 5'4" and weighing barely 130 pounds, Sarah looked more like a college student on a hiking trip than a specialist brought in to solve the military's most pressing problem. Her weapon of choice, a customized .22 caliber precision rifle, seemed almost toy-like compared to the heavy .50 caliber Barrett sniper rifles and M4 carbines that dominated the base's armory. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone, especially not on Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, who had been leading reconnaissance missions in this particular valley for the better part of 18 months. "You've got to be kidding me," Rodriguez muttered to his team as they watched Sarah methodically check her equipment. "Command sends us someone who looks like she should be serving coffee at Starbucks, carrying a rifle that wouldn't take down a prairie dog at 50 yards. What's next? Are they going to send us a Boy Scout troop with slingshots?" The laughter that rippled through the group was the kind that soldiers share when they think they're witnessing bureaucratic incompetence at its finest. These were men who had seen combat, who had earned their respect through blood, sweat, and the kind of experiences that forge warriors. They had requested additional sniper support, expecting someone cut from the same cloth as Chris Kyle or Carlos Hathcock, someone whose reputation preceded them like thunder before lightning. Instead, they got Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old former competitive shooter from Oregon who had somehow convinced someone in the Pentagon that she was the solution to their Ahmad Hassan problem. Hassan, known locally as the Ghost of Kandahar, had been terrorizing supply convoys and forward positions for over 2 years. He was a master of guerrilla warfare, appearing and disappearing like smoke, always staying just beyond the reach of conventional military tactics. The Rangers had lost 3 good men to Hassan's attacks in the past 6 months alone. Corporal James "Jimmy" Thompson, barely 21, had been driving a supply truck when Hassan's perfectly placed shot had taken him out from what investigators later determined was nearly 800 yards away. Sergeant Michael O'Brien, a 30-year-old father of 2, had been providing overwatch for a patrol when Hassan had somehow managed to outflank the entire team, eliminating O'Brien with a single shot before vanishing into the mountain terrain like he had never existed. Most recently, they had lost Private First Class David Kim, a kid from California who had been 3 weeks away from rotating home to his pregnant wife. Hassan had waited for hours, maybe days, in a position that gave him the perfect angle on their checkpoint. One shot, clean and precise, and another family back home would be getting a visit from uniformed officers bearing folded flags and condolences. The psychological impact of Hassan's campaign was perhaps even more devastating than the tactical losses. The Rangers found themselves looking over their shoulders constantly, second-guessing every movement, every position. Sleep came fitfully, if at all. The man had turned their deployment into a deadly game of cat and mouse, and so far, they had been the mice. Command had tried everything. They had brought in their best snipers, men with decades of experience and confirmed kills that numbered in the dozens. They had deployed drone surveillance, satellite imagery, and even attempted to use local informants to track Hassan's movements. Nothing worked. The man seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to anticipate their moves, to be 3 steps ahead of their best tactical minds. That's when someone in the intelligence community had mentioned Sarah Chen's name. Her file made for interesting reading, though most of the Rangers would have laughed if they had seen it. She held 17 national precision shooting championships, had set multiple records in small-caliber long-range competitions, and possessed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of ballistics and wind patterns. More importantly, she had developed unconventional techniques that had impressed even the most skeptical observers in the competitive shooting world. But competitions were one thing. This was war, and Hassan wasn't a paper target standing still at a predetermined distance. He was a living, breathing predator who had made a career out of killing American soldiers and disappearing into terrain that seemed to swallow him whole. As Sarah finished her equipment check and began walking toward the command tent, Sergeant Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. "Mark my words," he said to his team. "This is going to be the shortest deployment in military history. That little girl is going to take one look at what we're dealing with out here and be on the next transport back to wherever they found her." What Rodriguez and his team didn't know was that Sarah had already studied Hassan's patterns, had analyzed every after-action report, and had developed a theory about how to find him. More importantly, she had brought tools and techniques that no one at Forward Operating Base Sentinel had ever seen before. The real story was just beginning. Colonel James Morrison had seen his share of specialists, consultants, and supposed experts. During his 23 years in the military, most of them were either academic types who had never heard a shot fired in anger, or grizzled veterans whose best days were behind them. As he watched Sarah Chen spread her materials across the briefing room table, he found himself wondering which category she might fall into. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his rank through more than just time and grade, "I know what you're thinking. I had the same thoughts when I first saw Miss Chun's file. But I've learned not to judge a book by its cover, and I suggest you do the same." The briefing room fell silent, except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional radio chatter from the communications center. 8 Rangers sat around the table, their faces showing various degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and barely concealed amusement. Sarah seemed oblivious to their attitudes as she carefully arranged photographs, topographical maps, and ballistics charts in precise rows. "I've been studying your Hassan problem for the past 6 weeks," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone addressing a room full of combat veterans. "I've analyzed every engagement, every sighting, every piece of intelligence you've gathered, and I think I know why you haven't been able to stop him." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Enlighten us, miss. What do you see that we've missed?" Sarah picked up a red marker and began drawing on a large map of the operational area. "You've been hunting Hassan like he's a conventional sniper. You've been looking for elevated positions, natural hides, places where someone would set up a traditional overwatch position. But Hassan isn't a traditional sniper." She circled several locations on the map where attacks had occurred. "Look at these engagement distances: 847 yards, 923 yards, 776 yards. All of them well within the capability of standard military rifles. But look at the angles." She drew lines from suspected firing positions to the locations where soldiers had been hit. Every single one of these shots came from what you would consider a suboptimal position. Lower ground, poor sight lines, positions that your training would tell you to avoid. Lieutenant Marcus Foster, the youngest officer in the room, leaned forward. "What are you getting at?" "Hassan isn't trying to find the perfect sniper position," Sarah explained. "He's finding positions that you wouldn't consider, positions that your own training tells you to ignore. He's using your doctrine against you." The room was quiet now, the earlier skepticism replaced by reluctant attention. Sarah continued her analysis, pointing to specific locations on the map. "Here, at Checkpoint Delta, your after-action report says the shot came from the ridgeline. But look at the trajectory analysis. The bullet path doesn't match any position. On that ridge. It had to come from down here, from this depression that you dismissed because it doesn't offer good fields of fire. Sergeant Rodriguez studied the map more carefully. That position is a death trap. No escape routes, limited visibility, completely exposed to counterfire. Exactly, Sarah replied. That's why you never considered it. But Hassan did, because he knows you well enough to predict where you'll look and where you won't. He's not trying to win a conventional engagement. He's trying to take one shot and disappear, and he's willing to accept tactical disadvantages to achieve strategic surprise. Colonel Morrison nodded slowly. Go on. Sarah pulled out a different map, this one marked with weather patterns and wind data. Hassan is also using environmental factors that most snipers would consider prohibitive. Look at the timing of his attacks. Every single engagement occurred during periods of high variable wind, conditions that would make most snipers wait for better weather. That doesn't make sense, Foster interjected. Variable wind makes long-range shooting nearly impossible. It makes it nearly impossible. If you're using conventional techniques, Sarah corrected. But what if Hassan has developed methods for dealing with variable wind? What if he's actually using the wind as camouflage, taking shots when the sound will be distorted and the origin harder to pinpoint? The implications of her analysis were beginning to sink in. They hadn't been hunting a conventional sniper at all. They had been hunting someone who had deliberately developed unconventional methods, specifically to counter their training and expectations. So how do we catch him? Rodriguez asked. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the briefing room. We beat him at his own game. We stop trying to predict where a sniper would position himself and start trying to predict where Hassan would position himself. And we do it with tools and techniques that he won't expect. She gestured to her compact rifle. This .22 caliber system isn't a liability, it's an advantage. It's quieter, it has less muzzle flash, and it's far more maneuverable than the systems you've been using. More importantly, it allows me to take positions that would be impossible with a heavier rifle. A .22 won't stop Hassan at 800 yards, Morrison pointed out. It will if you know exactly where to place the shot, Sarah replied. And if you're willing to get close enough to guarantee precision over power. Hassan has been successful because he thinks like a guerrilla fighter instead of a conventional sniper. I'm going to be successful because I think like a competitive shooter instead of a military sniper. The room fell silent as the Rangers processed this information. They had been fighting Hassan on his terms, using his rulebook. Sarah was proposing to change the rules entirely. What do you need from us? Morrison asked. I need you to stop looking for Hassan and start helping me set up the conditions where Hassan will look for me. Sarah replied. I need you to trust me, even when what I'm asking doesn't make sense according to your training. And I need you to be ready to move when I give you the signal. The briefing was just the beginning. The real test would come when they faced Hassan in the unforgiving terrain of the Afghan mountains. The pre-dawn darkness of the crude Afghan mountains carried a chill that seemed to seep through even the best military gear. Sarah Chen moved through the rocky terrain with a fluid grace that surprised the Rangers accompanying her, her compact rifle secured across her back and her movements barely disturbing the loose stones beneath her feet. She had insisted on a small team for this first reconnaissance mission, just herself, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Jake Martinez, a communications specialist who could coordinate with base if things went sideways. This is insane, Rodriguez muttered as they approached what Sarah had identified as a potential Hassan position. We're walking right into his backyard. Sarah paused at a cluster of boulders that provided natural concealment and pulled out a small electronic device that looked like a cross between a weather station and a smartphone. Not his backyard, she corrected quietly. His office. There's a difference. The device in her hands was measuring wind speed, direction, humidity, and temperature with scientific precision. Every 30 seconds, it logged data that Sarah studied, with the intensity of a scholar reading ancient texts. To the Rangers, it looked like she was playing with expensive toys. To Sarah, it was gathering the intelligence that would make the difference between success and failure. Hassan has been successful because he understands this environment better than anyone else, Sarah explained as she recorded measurements. He knows how the wind behaves in these valleys, how temperature changes affect ballistics, how the terrain channels sound. We need to understand it just as well. Rodriguez checked his watch. They had been moving for 3 hours, and the sun would be up soon. Ma'am, we need to be thinking about extraction. This area is hot, and we're exposed. Sarah nodded but didn't move from her position. 5 more minutes. I need to understand the morning wind patterns. As if summoned by her words, a gentle breeze began to flow through the valley, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of goat bells. Sarah's device registered the change immediately, and she smiled, the first genuine expression of satisfaction Rodriguez had seen from her. There, she said. That's what I was waiting for. Hassan knows about this wind pattern. He's probably used it to mask the sound of his movement and the report of his rifle. Martinez, who had been maintaining radio contact with base, looked up from his equipment. Command wants to know our status. They're getting nervous about how long we've been out here. Tell them we're gathering intelligence, Sarah replied. And that we'll be moving to Phase 2 shortly. Phase 2, as Sarah had explained during the briefing, involved what she called aggressive positioning. Instead of trying to hunt Hassan from traditional overwatch positions, they would establish themselves in locations that would force Hassan to engage them on terms that favored precision. Overpowered. As they began their movement to the next position, Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Overwatch 1, this is base. We have eyes on potential hostile movement in your sector. 2 individuals, approximately 1,200 meters northeast of your position. Rodriguez immediately signaled for the team to take cover. Through his binoculars, he could see 2 figures moving along a ridgeline that offered an excellent view of the valley below. Could be Hassan, he whispered. Sarah studied the distant figures through her own optics, but her expression remained calm. No, she said after a moment. Wrong movement pattern. Hassan moves like he's part of the terrain. These guys are moving like they're trying to get somewhere quickly. Her assessment proved correct when the figures revealed themselves to be local herders driving a small flock of goats. But the encounter had highlighted an important point. In this terrain, positive identification was crucial, and Sarah's ability to read human behavior might be just as important as her shooting skills. As they settled into their planned observation position, Sarah began the methodical process of what she called environmental mapping. Using her precision instruments, she measured wind patterns, temperature gradients, and even the acoustic properties of the surrounding terrain. To the Rangers, it looked like she was conducting a scientific experiment. In reality, she was building a 3-dimensional model of the battle space that would allow her to predict how Hassan might approach his next target. The key to beating Hassan, Sarah explained as she worked, is understanding that he's not just a sniper, he's a student of this environment. He knows things about these mountains that most people never learn. But I'm willing to bet he doesn't know as much about precision ballistics as he thinks he does. Rodriguez was beginning to understand Sarah's approach. You're not just trying to outshoot him. You're trying to outthink him. Exactly. Hassan has been successful because he's been fighting a different war than the one you've been trying to fight. He's been fighting a war of patience, precision, and environmental advantage. I'm going to fight the same war, but with better tools and better training. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah's instruments detected subtle changes in the wind patterns that she had been expecting. There, she said, pointing to a distant ridge. That's where Hassan would position himself if he wanted to hit the supply convoy scheduled to come through this afternoon. Martinez looked skeptical. That position is over 1,000 yards from the road, and it's downhill. No professional sniper would take that shot. Hassan would, Sarah replied confidently, because he knows the wind will carry the sound away from the road, and he knows the downhill angle will confuse any counter-sniper response. Plus, he's probably calculated that you'll be looking for threats from higher ground. The stage was set for the confrontation that would determine whether Sarah's unconventional approach could succeed, where traditional military tactics had failed. In the distance, the supply convoy was beginning its journey through the valley. Unaware that they were about to become players in a deadly game of strategy and skill, Hassan was out there waiting. And for the first time in months, someone was waiting for him. The supply convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles making their way through the narrow valley road, their diesel engines echoing off the rocky walls like mechanical thunder. From her concealed position 800 meters away, Sarah watched through her high-powered spotting scope as the vehicles navigated the winding path that had claimed so many lives over the past 2 years. Her .22 caliber rifle was positioned on a custom bipod, its precision-engineered barrel pointing toward the distant ridge where her calculations suggested Hassan would appear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez lay beside her, his own rifle trained on the same general area, though he remained skeptical about Sarah's predictions. "I still don't see how you can be so sure he'll be there," he whispered. "We've been watching that ridge for 3 hours." Sarah's response was barely audible. "Because I know what he's thinking. He's watching the convoy, calculating wind speed, measuring distances. He's probably been in position for hours, just like we have. The difference is, he doesn't know we're here." The convoy was now directly below their position, moving at the cautious pace that had become standard in this area. The lead vehicle's gunner was scanning the ridgelines with professional vigilance, his weapon system rotating in slow arcs as he searched for threats that might not materialize, or might materialize from directions that no one expected. Sarah's earpiece crackled with a transmission from Martinez, who was positioned 200 meters to their right, with communication equipment and a backup rifle. "Overwatch 2, I have movement on the eastern ridge. Single individual, approximately 1,100 meters from the convoy." Sarah shifted her scope to the indicated position and immediately saw what Martinez had spotted. A figure in earth-colored clothing was moving along the ridge with the kind of purposeful stealth that spoke of military training and lethal intent. But more importantly, the figure was moving toward the exact position that Sarah had predicted. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Hassan." Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. After months of hunting ghosts and shadows, they were finally looking at their target. Hassan appeared to be alone, carrying what looked like a scoped rifle and moving with the confidence of someone who had never been successfully hunted. "He's heading for the depression between those 2 rock formations," Sarah continued. "The position gives him a clear shot at the convoy, but more importantly, it gives him multiple escape routes. He's not planning to engage us, he doesn't know we exist." The convoy was now in what Sarah had identified as the kill zone. If Hassan was going to take his shot, it would be within the next few minutes. Sarah began her final preparations, checking her rifle's zero, confirming wind measurements, and calculating the complex ballistics required for a shot that would span nearly 1,200 meters. "There," Rodriguez said suddenly. "He's setting up." Through their scopes, they could see Hassan establishing his firing position with practiced efficiency. He was exactly where Sarah had predicted, but the distance and angle were challenging even for someone with Sarah's skills. More concerning was the fact that Hassan's position offered him excellent concealment from the convoy's perspective, while giving him a clear field of fire. "He's going to take the shot in less than 60 seconds, Sarah announced. "I can see him settling into his final position." Rodriguez felt the familiar pre-combat tension flooding his system. "What's your plan?" Sarah's reply was delivered with the calm precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours in competitive shooting environments where pressure was measured in tenths of points rather than human lives. "I'm going to take the shot first." Moment he commits to his firing position, he becomes a stationary target. That's when his advantage disappears. The mathematics involved in Sarah's shot were staggering. At 1,200 meters, her .22 caliber bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach its target. During that time, the bullet would be affected by wind, temperature, humidity, and the Earth's rotation. Hassan's position was not only distant, but also at a different elevation, requiring complex calculations to compensate for the bullet's trajectory. But Sarah had spent her entire adult life mastering exactly these kinds of calculations. While the Rangers had been trained to engage targets at realistic combat distances, Sarah had been trained to place bullets with surgical precision at distances that most people would consider impossible. "He's acquiring his target," Rodriguez reported. "The lead vehicle is right in his crosshairs." Sarah's breathing became controlled and rhythmic, a technique she had perfected through thousands of hours of practice. Her finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure that would, in a few seconds, determine whether Hassan's reign of terror would continue or end. "Wind is steady at 4 miles per hour, left to right," she whispered. "Temperature is holding constant. Distance is 1,187 meters." Hassan was now completely focused on the convoy below, his attention wholly absorbed by the target acquisition process. He had no idea that 1,200 meters away, another marksman was acquiring him as a target. Sarah's shot broke with the crisp precision of her custom trigger system. The .22 caliber bullet began its 3-second journey through the thin mountain air, carrying with it the hopes of every soldier who had lost friends to Hassan's campaign of terror. For a moment, everything was silent except for the distant rumble of the convoy and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Then, through his spotting scope, Rodriguez saw Hassan suddenly jerk and roll away from his rifle. "Hit!" Rodriguez called out. "You got him." But Sarah was already cycling her bolt and reacquiring her target. "That wasn't a kill shot," she announced. "He's wounded, but he's still mobile. He's going to try to escape." The real hunt was just beginning. Hassan's world exploded into pain and confusion as Sarah's bullet found its mark. The .22 caliber projectile had struck him in the right shoulder, spinning him away from his rifle and sending him tumbling behind the rocky outcropping that had provided his concealment. For the first time in over 2 years of successful operations, someone had outmaneuvered him, outhought him, and outshot him. Blood was flowing freely from the wound, and Hassan's right arm was essentially useless. But his mind remained sharp, and his survival instincts kicked in immediately. He had been wounded, not killed, which meant his attacker was either inexperienced or using an underpowered weapon. Either way, he still had options. "He's moving," Sarah reported, tracking Hassan's position through her scope. "He's trying to reach that cluster of boulders about 50 meters to his east. If he makes it there, he'll have cover and multiple escape routes." Rodriguez was already adjusting his own rifle, but the angle and distance made a follow-up shot extremely difficult. "Can you take him again?" Sarah's response was immediate. "Not from this position. He's learned that someone is shooting at him, and he's moving unpredictably. We need to flush him out." Martinez's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Overwatch 1, I have a clean line of sight to his position. Do you want me to engage?" "Negative," Sarah replied. "We need him alive if possible. Hassan has been operating in this area for 2 years. He knows things about enemy networks, supply routes, and safe houses that intelligence needs." Rodriguez looked at Sarah with new respect. "Even in the heat of combat," She was thinking strategically about the larger mission. So what's your plan? Sarah was already packing her equipment. We're going to hunt him the same way he's been hunting you. We're going to use the terrain, the environment, and his own expectations against him. The three rangers began moving immediately, using the rocky terrain to mask their approach. Sarah's movement was particularly impressive. She seemed to flow across the landscape like water, never presenting a clear target and always keeping natural cover between herself and Hassan's last known position. Hassan is wounded and probably going into shock, Sarah explained as they moved. His decision-making is going to be compromised. He's going to rely on instinct and training, which means he's going to do what he's been trained to do, escape and evade. Rodriguez was beginning to understand Sarah's tactical thinking. And you know what he's been trained to do? I know what anyone would be trained to do in this situation. He's going to try to put distance between himself and the threat. He's going to try to get to high ground where he can observe his pursuers, and he's going to try to get to a position where he can either escape or set up an ambush. The logic was sound, but Rodriguez had hunted enough wounded enemies to know that desperation could make people unpredictable. A wounded Hassan might be even more dangerous than a healthy one. As they reached a position that offered a view of Hassan's escape route, Sarah deployed her equipment with practiced efficiency. Her rifle was ready in seconds, and her environmental monitoring devices were already providing updated wind and temperature readings. "There," Martinez whispered, pointing to a shadow moving between two large rocks about 400 meters away. "That's got to be him." Sarah studied the movement through her scope. Confirmed. He's moving toward that ridgeline. If he reaches it, he'll have a commanding view of this entire area. The distance was well within the capability of Sarah's rifle. But the target was moving and partially concealed. More importantly, Hassan now knew he was being hunted and would be watching for muzzle flashes and listening for the sound of gunfire. "He's going to stop and observe," Sarah predicted. "He's wounded, but he's still thinking tactically. He's going to try to identify his pursuers and plan his next move." Sure enough, Hassan's movement stopped near a cluster of boulders that provided both concealment and a good observation point. Through their scopes, the rangers could see him examining his wound and scanning the area where they had been positioned. "He's looking right at us," Rodriguez observed. "Or at least he's looking at where we were." Sarah smiled grimly. "He's thinking like a sniper. He's trying to figure out where the shot came from, what kind of weapon was used, and how many people are hunting him. The problem is, he's thinking like a military sniper, not a competitive shooter." "What's the difference?" Martinez asked. "A military sniper would try to take another shot from the same position, or would move to a similar position with comparable advantages. Hassan is probably watching for exactly that kind of movement. But a competitive shooter would already be thinking about the next shot, the next position, the next advantage." Sarah began moving again, this time toward a position that would give her an angle on Hassan's current location. "He's expecting us to behave like soldiers. Instead, we're going to behave like problem solvers." The cat-and-mouse game was entering its next phase. Hassan was wounded, but he was still dangerous and still had intimate knowledge of the terrain. However, for the first time in his campaign against American forces, he was facing someone who thought about combat in fundamentally different terms. "Movement," Rodriguez reported. "He's on the move again, heading uphill toward that rock formation." Sarah tracked Hassan's movement and made a quick calculation. "He's going for the high ground, classic tactical thinking. But he's forgetting. That high ground makes you visible from multiple angles." The hunt was far from over, but the dynamics had shifted. Hassan was no longer the predator, he was the prey. And Sarah was about to demonstrate why her unconventional approach had been so effective in competitive shooting. But as Sarah watched Hassan's movement pattern, something began to trouble her. His path wasn't random, it was deliberate, calculated. Despite his wounds, Despite being hunted, Hassan was still thinking several moves ahead. What she had interpreted as desperate flight might actually be something far more dangerous. Hassan pressed his back against the cold rock, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts as he tried to manage the pain radiating from his shoulder wound. The bullet had missed the major arteries, but the damage was significant enough to severely limit his mobility. More troubling was the realization that someone had anticipated his position with uncanny accuracy. In over 2 years of operations against American forces, Hassan had never been outmaneuvered. He had built his reputation on being unpredictable, on understanding the American military mindset well enough to stay 3 steps ahead of their best tacticians. But today, someone had predicted his actions with precision that bordered on the supernatural. Through his binoculars, Hassan scanned the terrain below, looking for signs of his pursuers. His training told him to expect a standard military response multiple. Teams moving in coordinated patterns, air support, overwhelming firepower. Instead, he saw nothing. The landscape appeared empty, which was somehow more unsettling than facing an obvious threat. "They're still out there," he whispered to himself in Pashto. But where? Sarah and her team had repositioned themselves in a depression that offered concealment while providing multiple angles of observation. Sarah's environmental monitoring equipment was working continuously, providing real-time data about wind patterns, temperature changes, and even the acoustic properties of the terrain. "He's been in that position for 12 minutes, Sarah observed. "He's thinking, trying to figure out what kind of enemy he's facing. The problem is, he's thinking like someone who's been successful against conventional military tactics." Rodriguez was studying Hassan's position through his own optics. "What's he seeing that we're not?" "He's seeing exactly what we want him to see, nothing. Hassan has been successful because he's been fighting predictable enemies. Military doctrine is designed to be consistent and reliable, which means it's also predictable. Hassan has learned to exploit that predictability." Sarah's analysis was interrupted by movement on the ridge. Hassan was finally making his move, but instead of continuing uphill as expected, he was moving laterally along the ridge face, using the terrain to mask his movement. "Smart," Sarah admitted. "He's not doing what I expected him to do." Martinez looked concerned. "Does that mean your plan isn't working?" "It means Hassan is smarter than most of the people he's been fighting," Sarah replied. "But it also means he's still thinking tactically instead of strategically. He's focused on immediate survival instead of long-term objectives." Through her scope, Sarah could see Hassan moving with impressive skill despite his wound. He was using every piece of cover, every shadow, every natural concealment to mask his movement. His technique was flawless, and under normal circumstances, he would have been nearly impossible to track. But Sarah wasn't tracking Hassan's movement through the terrain. She was tracking his decision-making process. Every choice Hassan made revealed something about his mental state, his priorities, and his understanding of the tactical situation. "He's moving toward the old shepherd's path," Sarah announced. "The one that leads down to the valley floor about 2 kilometers from here." Rodriguez checked his map. "How can you be sure?" "Because that's the logical choice. The path provides concealment, multiple escape routes, and access to terrain that he knows intimately. If I were wounded and trying to escape, that's exactly where I would go." The insight was proving accurate. Hassan was indeed moving toward the shepherd's path, though he was taking an indirect route that would make tracking him difficult for conventional pursuers. "The question is," Sarah continued, "does he know that we know where he's going?" This was the heart of the psychological warfare that had been playing out since Hassan first appeared in the region. Every successful engagement had been a battle of minds as much as marksmanship. Hassan had been winning that battle by understanding his enemies better than they understood him. But Sarah was changing the rules of engagement. Instead of trying to outfight Hassan, she was trying to outthink him. Instead of relying on superior firepower, she was relying on superior analysis. "We need to move," Sarah announced. "If Hassan reaches that path, he'll have too many options. We need to intercept him before he gets there." The three rangers began moving immediately, using the terrain to mask their approach. Sarah's movement was particularly noteworthy. She seemed to anticipate the natural flow of the landscape, choosing routes that provided maximum concealment while maintaining tactical flexibility. "There's something else," Sarah said as they moved. "Hassan is wounded, but he's not moving like someone who's primarily focused on escape. He's moving like someone who's still thinking about offensive action." Rodriguez felt a chill. "You think he's planning an ambush?" "I think he's planning something. Hassan didn't become successful by running away from fights. He became successful by turning disadvantages into advantages." The observation proved prescient. As they reached a position that overlooked the shepherd's path, Sarah's scope detected movement that shouldn't have been there. Hassan wasn't just trying to escape, he was setting up a position that would allow him to observe his pursuers. "He's turned the tables," Sarah announced. "Hassan is now hunting us." The psychological battle had reached a new level. Hassan had used his apparent retreat to mask his true intentions, positioning himself where he could observe and potentially engage his pursuers. It was a brilliant tactical move that demonstrated why he had been so successful for so long. "He's not running," Sarah realized with growing alarm. "He's repositioning for a counterattack. Hassan just turned our hunt into his ambush." The predator had become the prey and then transformed back into the predator. Sarah's worst fears were being confirmed. Hassan's movement hadn't been random retreat, but a carefully orchestrated maneuver designed to draw them into a trap. The wounded fighter was about to become the hunter once again, and Sarah's team was walking directly into his crosshairs. Sarah's warning about Hassan's counter-ambush had come just in time, but the realization that they were walking into a trap sent a cold shock through the ranger team. The wounded fighter they had been pursuing had just demonstrated the tactical brilliance that had made him legendary, transforming his apparent weakness into a position of deadly strength. For months, Hassan had been the phantom who struck without warning and disappeared without trace. Now wounded and supposedly on the run, he had orchestrated one of the most dangerous reversals Sarah had ever witnessed. The hunter had become the hunted, and the hunted had become the hunter. "He's got us," Rodriguez whispered, his voice tight with the recognition of their predicament. "We're exposed, and he's got the high ground." Sarah's response was immediate and calm. "No, he doesn't have us. He has where we were supposed to be. There's a difference." Through her scope, Sarah could see Hassan's position, a natural depression in the rock face that provided excellent concealment, while offering a commanding view of the approaches to the shepherd's path. It was a textbook ambush position, the kind of tactical setup that had claimed the lives of too many American soldiers. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility. While Hassan had been thinking like a guerrilla fighter, she had been thinking like a chess player, considering not just the immediate move, but the moves that would follow. Hassan's counter-ambush was brilliant, but it was also predictable for someone who understood his psychology. "Martinez," Sarah said quietly, "I need you to move to that cluster of rocks about 200 meters to our right. But I need you to move like you're trying to stay hidden, but not quite succeeding. Let Hassan see glimpses of movement." Martinez looked confused. "You want me to give away our position?" "I want you to give away a position. Hassan is expecting us to approach his ambush site using standard military tactics. He's positioned himself to counter those tactics. But what if we're not using standard tactics?" Rodriguez was beginning to understand Sarah's thinking. "You're going to make him think we're doing one thing while we're actually doing something else." "Exactly. Hassan's ambush position is perfect for engaging targets approaching from the valley floor, but it's vulnerable to engagement from the ridgeline above him. The problem is, getting to that ridgeline requires moving through terrain that Hassan can observe. Sarah's plan was audacious in its simplicity. While Martinez created a distraction by moving in a way that would draw Hassan's attention, Sarah would use the terrain to approach Hassan's position from an unexpected angle. It was a high-risk maneuver that depended on precise timing and Hassan's predictable response to apparent threats. "What if he doesn't take the bait?" Martinez asked. "Then we're in trouble," Sarah admitted. But Hassan has been successful because he's been fighting predictable enemies. His whole tactical system is built on anticipating and countering standard military responses. If we give him what he expects to see, he'll respond the way he's been trained to respond. Martinez began his movement, deliberately allowing glimpses of his position to be visible from Hassan's ambush site. Almost immediately, Sarah could see Hassan adjusting his position, bringing his rifle to bear on the area where Martinez was moving. "He's taking the bait," Sarah reported. "Hassan is focused on Martinez's position. He's preparing to engage." This was the critical moment. Hassan was now committed to his ambush position, his attention focused on what he perceived as the primary threat. Sarah began her movement toward the ridgeline, using the terrain to mask her approach while Hassan's attention was elsewhere. The climb to the ridge was treacherous, made more difficult by the need to move silently while carrying precision equipment. Sarah's competitive shooting background had required her to maintain physical fitness, but this was different. This was movement under combat conditions, where a single mistake could be fatal. "Martinez, hold your position," Sarah whispered. "I need Hassan to stay focused on you for another 3 minutes." Those 3 minutes felt like hours. Sarah could hear her own breathing, could feel her heart rate elevated from the climb and the stress of the situation. But her hands remained steady, her movements controlled by the discipline that had made her a champion in competitive shooting. Finally, Sarah reached a position that offered a clear view of Hassan's ambush site. Through her scope, she could see him clearly for the first time since the initial engagement. Hassan was positioned exactly where her calculations had predicted, his rifle trained on the area where Martinez had been moving. The distance was approximately 300 meters, well within the effective range of Sarah's .22 caliber system. More importantly, Hassan was now stationary, focused on his intended target and unaware that he had become a target himself. "Hassan," Sarah whispered, "you're about to learn the difference between hunting soldiers and hunting competitors." Sarah's breathing became controlled and rhythmic. Her finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure that had become second nature through thousands of hours of practice. The wind was steady, the temperature constant, and the target was clearly defined. Hassan's world was about to change forever, and he didn't even know it. But as Sarah prepared to take her shot, Hassan made an unexpected move. Instead of maintaining his position, he suddenly shifted, almost as if he had sensed something wrong. It was the kind of battlefield instinct that had kept him alive for 2 years, and it was about to save his life again, or was it? Sarah's shot broke at the exact moment. Hassan began to move. The bullet traveled its 300-meter path in less than a second, but Hassan's movement had changed the geometry of the engagement. Instead of the clean shot Sarah had planned, the bullet struck Hassan's rifle, shattering the scope and sending metal fragments into his face. Hassan rolled away from his position, temporarily blinded and disoriented. But he was still alive, still dangerous, and still thinking tactically. The final phase of the engagement was about to begin. The tables had turned completely. What began as Sarah's carefully planned hunt had become Hassan's expertly orchestrated ambush, and now both sides were locked in a deadly game where the next move could determine who lived and who died. Hassan's world had exploded into chaos and pain. The bullet that destroyed his rifle had sent metal fragments into his face, leaving him partially blinded and completely disoriented. Blood flowed from multiple small wounds, mixing with the dust and debris that had been kicked up by the impact. For a moment, he lay still, his mind struggling to process what had happened. His rifle was destroyed, his shoulder was wounded, and his face was cut and bleeding. But Hassan was still alive, and his tactical mind was still functioning. Someone had outmaneuvered him twice now, which meant he was facing an opponent unlike any he had encountered before. "Target is down but still mobile," Sarah reported from her position on the ridge. "Hassan is wounded, but not incapacitated. He's going to try to escape or find another weapon." Rodriguez was already moving, using the distraction to advance toward Hassan's position. "What's your assessment? Can we take him alive?" Sarah was tracking Hassan's movement through her scope, watching as he crawled away from his destroyed rifle toward a cluster of rocks that offered temporary concealment. "He's hurt badly, but he's still thinking tactically. Hassan is going to try to use his knowledge of the terrain to escape, or he's going to try to find a way to take some of us with him." The assessment proved accurate. Hassan had managed to reach a position that offered both concealment and a view of the approaches to his location. More importantly, Sarah could see that he was reaching for something, a backup weapon or perhaps an explosive device. "He's got something," Sarah announced. "I can see him handling what looks like a grenade or some kind of improvised explosive device." The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Hassan was wounded, cornered, and apparently willing to use explosives rather than be captured. The tactical advantage that Sarah had worked so hard to achieve was rapidly eroding. "Martinez, hold your position," Sarah commanded. "Rodriguez, stop your advance. Hassan is about to do something desperate." Hassan's voice suddenly echoed across the rocky terrain, speaking in accented English. "I know you can hear me, American soldiers. You have fought well today, better than any who have come before, but this is not over." Sarah felt a chill at the sound of Hassan's voice. After months of hunting a ghost, they were finally hearing from the man himself. His English was clear, his tone controlled despite his injuries. This was someone who had been educated, trained, and molded into a weapon of war. "You think you have won," Hassan continued, "but you have only won today. There are others like me, others who will continue this fight. Kill me, and 10 will take my place." Rodriguez's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. "He's trying to negotiate. Or he's trying to buy time." Sarah studied Hassan's position through her scope. He was indeed holding what appeared to be a grenade, but his movement suggested that he was also trying to treat his wounds and assess his tactical situation. "He's not negotiating," Sarah realized. "He's making a statement. Hassan knows he's not getting out of this alive." The psychological profile that Sarah had developed of Hassan was proving accurate. He was someone who had committed himself completely to his cause, someone who would rather die fighting than accept capture. But he was also someone who understood the value of his own life and wouldn't waste it without purpose. "Hassan," Sarah called out, her voice carrying clearly across the rocky terrain. "You're wounded and surrounded. There's no escape from this position. But you're also a soldier, and soldiers understand honor. Surrender now, and you'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention." Hassan's laugh was bitter and filled with pain. "Geneva Convention? You Americans speak of conventions while you bomb villages and kill children. There is no honor in surrender to murderers." Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about stopping Hassan, it was about understanding the forces that had created him, the grievances that had driven him to wage war against American forces. But understanding didn't change the tactical reality. Hassan was still dangerous, still capable of killing, and still committed to his cause. "You're right," Sarah replied. "War is ugly, and innocent people die. But killing more soldiers won't bring back the dead. It will only create more widows, more orphans, more people who want revenge." "You speak wisdom," Hassan acknowledged. "But wisdom comes too late. The cycle of violence has already begun, and it will not end with my death. Sarah could see Hassan adjusting his position, preparing for what appeared to be a final assault. He was gathering his strength, probably planning to charge their position with the grenade. It would be a suicide attack, but it might take one or more of them with him. "Rodriguez Martinez, prepare for contact," Sarah whispered. Hassan is about to make his move. But Hassan had one more surprise. Instead of charging, he began to speak again, this time in Pashto. Sarah didn't understand the words, but she recognized the cadence. It was a prayer, the kind of prayer that warriors say when they prepare to die. He's not going to charge, Sarah realized. He's going to detonate the grenade where he is. He's choosing martyrdom over capture. The final seconds. We're counting down. Hassan had made his choice, and Sarah had to make hers. She could take the shot and end Hassan's life before he could detonate the explosive, or she could try to find another solution. Time was running out, and the decision would determine not just the outcome of this engagement, but the broader implications of the war they were all fighting. Hassan's desperate gambit with the explosive device had created the most dangerous moment of the entire engagement. Everything that had led to this point, Sarah's unconventional tactics, Hassan's masterful counter-ambush, the psychological warfare between two skilled opponents, had culminated in this single moment where life and death hung in the balance. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched Hassan through her scope, his wounded form hunched over the explosive device that would end his life and potentially claim the lives of the Rangers pursuing him. The prayer he was reciting in Pashto had the rhythm of finality, the cadence of a man preparing to meet his maker on his own terms. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger of her .22 caliber rifle. At 300 meters, she could end Hassan's life with a single shot, preventing him from detonating the grenade and ensuring that his 2-year campaign of terror would end here, in this desolate stretch of Afghan mountains. It would be a clean solution, tactically sound and strategically justified, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the sound of Hassan's prayer, the recognition that beneath the enemy combatant was a human being facing death with dignity. Perhaps it was the understanding that Hassan's death would solve nothing, that, as he had said, others would take his place, and the cycle of violence would continue. "Sarah, take the shot," Rodriguez urged through the radio. "He's going to detonate any second." Sarah's training, her competitive shooting background, and her analytical mind all pointed to the same conclusion: eliminate the threat. Hassan was a confirmed enemy combatant responsible for the deaths of multiple American soldiers. He was preparing to commit a final act of violence that could claim more lives. The ethical calculus was clear, but Sarah had spent her entire career thinking differently than other people. While military snipers were trained to eliminate threats, competitive shooters were trained to achieve precision under pressure. The difference was subtle but important. It was the difference between destroying a target and mastering a challenge. "Hassan," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the mountain air. "I have a clear shot. I can end this right now. But I'm going to give you one more chance to choose differently." Hassan's prayer stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the rocks and the distant rumble of the convoy that had long since passed through the valley below. "Why?" Hassan asked, his voice carrying a mixture of pain and curiosity. "Why would you? Show mercy to your enemy?" Sarah's answer came from a place she hadn't expected. "Because I'm not your enemy. I'm a soldier doing my job, just like you're a soldier doing yours. But soldiers can choose to be something more than just instruments of war." Rodriguez was getting agitated. "Sarah, we don't have time for philosophy. Take the shot." But Sarah was operating on a different level now. She could see Hassan's position, could see the tension in his body as he prepared to detonate the explosive. But she could also see something else: uncertainty. Hassan was committed to his cause, but he was also human, and humans could sometimes be reached through unexpected means. I know what you're thinking, Sarah continued. You're thinking that your death will inspire others, that your sacrifice will advance your cause. But what if it doesn't? What if your death just creates more grief, more anger, more reasons for this war to continue? Hassan's response was immediate. And what would you have me do? Surrender to be tortured in your prisons? Betray my brothers to save my own life? I would have you think about what you really want to accomplish, Sarah replied. Do you want to kill more soldiers, or do you want to end the killing? The philosophical conversation was surreal given the tactical situation. Hassan was wounded, cornered, and holding a grenade. Sarah was positioned to kill him with a single shot. Rodriguez and Martinez were ready to engage if Hassan made any aggressive move. Yet here they were, having a conversation about war, peace, and the meaning of sacrifice. You speak of ending the killing, Hassan said, but you are here to kill. Me. I'm here to stop you from killing others, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. Hassan was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see him through her scope, blood still flowing from his wounds, his body shaking from shock and pain. But his eyes were alert, his mind clearly working through the implications of their conversation. If I surrender, Hassan said finally, will you guarantee that I will be treated with honor? Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Was Hassan actually considering surrender? After 2 years of successful operations, after building a reputation as an unstoppable ghost, was he willing to give up? I can guarantee that you'll be treated according to international law, Sarah replied. You'll receive medical treatment, you'll be held in proper conditions, and you'll have the opportunity to communicate with your family. My family is dead, Hassan said simply. Killed by American bombs 3 years ago. That is why I fight. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Hassan wasn't just an enemy combatant or a terrorist. He was someone who had lost everything and turned to violence as a response to grief and anger. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them. Then honor their memory by choosing life over death, Sarah said. Honor them by finding a way to build something instead of destroying everything. Hassan's laugh was bitter. Easy words from someone who has never lost everything. You're right, Sarah acknowledged. I don't know your pain, but I know that adding more pain to the world won't heal what you've lost. The moment of decision had arrived. Hassan's grip on the grenade was loosening, and Sarah could see him weighing his options. The choice he made in the next few seconds would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone in the valley. The philosophical battle between Sarah and Hassan had reached its crescendo. What had begun as a tactical engagement between enemies had evolved into something far more complex, a conversation about war, loss, honor, and the possibility of choosing a different path. Even in the darkest moments, the silence stretched across the mountain valley like a held breath. Hassan remained motionless behind his rocky cover, the grenade still in his hand, while Sarah maintained her scope picture from the ridge above. Rodriguez and Martinez held their positions, ready to react to whatever decision Hassan would make. The standoff had reached its critical point. I have spent 2 years killing your soldiers, Hassan said finally, his voice carrying across the rocky terrain with crystal clarity. I have become very good at it. I could kill all of you right now with this grenade, and your families would receive folded flags and empty promises. Sarah felt her finger tighten imperceptibly on the trigger. Hassan was right from his position. A well-thrown grenade could potentially eliminate or seriously wound all 3 Rangers. But something in his tone suggested he was working through the decision rather than simply stating his intention. But you won't, Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. Because you're not just a killer. You're a soldier, and soldiers understand that some victories cost more than defeats. Hassan's bitter laugh echoed off the rocks. You think you understand me, American sniper. You think because you can shoot straight and think tactically, you know what drives a man to war. "I know that you're in pain," Sarah said. "I know that you've lost people you cared about. I know that killing more soldiers won't bring them back. And I know that dying here won't honor their memory." The psychological battle was as intense as any physical engagement. Sarah was trying to reach something human in Hassan, something that existed beyond the warrior who had terrorized American forces for 2 years. It was a desperate gamble, but it was also the only chance to end this confrontation without more bloodshed. "My daughter was 7 years old," Hassan said suddenly. "She wanted to be a teacher. She had learned to read, and she would read to her younger brother every night before bed. The bomb that killed her was American. The pilot who dropped it was American. The politicians who ordered it were American." Sarah felt the weight of Hassan's words. She understood now why he had chosen to wage war against American forces, why he had developed such effective tactics, why he had been so successful for so long. Hassan wasn't just fighting for ideology or territory, he was fighting for the memory of his daughter. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry that this war has taken so much from so many people." "Your sorrow changes nothing," Hassan replied. "The dead remain dead, and the living must choose how to honor them." "Then honor your daughter by choosing to live," Sarah said. "Honor her by finding a way to build schools instead of destroying convoys. Honor her by making sure other children don't lose their parents the way she lost hers." Hassan was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see him through her scope, his body language suggesting an internal struggle that went far beyond the tactical situation. This was a man wrestling with grief, anger, and the fundamental question of how to respond to unbearable loss. "If I surrender," Hassan said finally, "will you tell me about your daughter?" Sarah felt confusion wash over her. "I don't have a daughter." "But you fight like someone protecting a child," Hassan observed. "You take risks that soldiers take when they have something precious to defend. What drives you to war, American sniper?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had spent so much effort trying to understand Hassan's motivations that she hadn't considered her own. Why was she here? What had driven her to volunteer for this dangerous mission? "I'm here because I want this war to end," Sarah said. "I'm here because I believe that my skills can save lives, can prevent more families from being destroyed by violence." "Then we want the same thing," Hassan said. "We both want the killing to stop." Sarah could see Hassan's grip on the grenade changing. He was making a decision, and she could only hope it was the right one. "Hassan, put down the grenade. Let us end this without more bloodshed." For a moment, Hassan remained motionless. Then, slowly, he placed the grenade on the ground beside him and raised his hands. "I surrender," he said. "But I surrender to you, American sniper, not to your army. You have shown me honor, and I will return that honor." Sarah felt relief flood through her system. "Rodriguez, Martinez, Hassan is surrendering. Approach carefully and secure the area." As the Rangers moved to secure Hassan, Sarah remained in her overwatch position, her rifle still trained on the surrender site. The immediate tactical situation was resolved, but the broader implications were just beginning to unfold. Hassan's surrender represented more than just the end of a 2-year campaign of guerrilla warfare. It represented the possibility that even the most intractable conflicts could be resolved through understanding, communication, and the recognition of shared humanity. As Rodriguez reached Hassan's position and began providing medical aid, Sarah finally lowered her rifle. The woman who had arrived at Forward Operating Base Sentinel with a .22 caliber rifle and unconventional ideas had succeeded where months of traditional military operations had failed. But the real victory wasn't tactical, it was human. Sarah had proven that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't superior firepower, but superior understanding. She had shown that thinking differently, fighting differently, and approaching problems from unexpected angles could achieve results that Conventional methods couldn't match. The Rangers who had laughed at her tiny rifle would never laugh again. They had witnessed something remarkable: the power of precision, preparation, and the willingness to see enemies as human beings rather than simply targets to be eliminated. Hassan's surrender would provide intelligence that would help end the broader conflict in the region. But more importantly, it would serve as an example of how wars could be ended through understanding rather than just overwhelming force. As the medical evacuation helicopter approached the valley, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. She had come to Afghanistan to prove that her unconventional methods could succeed where traditional approaches had failed. But she had discovered something more important: that the most powerful weapon in any conflict was the courage to see past the uniform, past the enemy designation, and recognize the human being underneath. The story of the Rangers who laughed at her tiny rifle had become the story of how understanding could triumph over hatred, how precision could overcome power, and how one woman's unconventional approach could change the course of a war. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.